should be a fun talk to end the day with, because I don't think the content is going to be particularly challenging, but some of the statistics I'm going to show you might challenge some of your assumptions about web development, your beliefs about web development, what you consider to be best practices for web development. So when I talk about browser native web development, one way to think about it is being framework free. But in fact, that's still defining HTML by a framework or the absence of a framework. So I like the term browser native because I want that to evoke in your mind the idea of what can you do in the browser natively? What functionality is available to you without a framework or without downloading any additional JavaScript libraries? Does that sound like a fun way to end your day? Yes? Thank you so much for being here. Let's go ahead and get started then. I love space. I'm so excited that we'll be going back and visiting the moon soon. But if you remember in the 1970s, the Apollo space capsules that were taking American astronauts to the moon and back, it's an iconic look, isn't it? We know exactly what that Apollo space capsule looks like. This is not Apollo. You can tell already this is the SpaceX Dragon space capsule. This is a very modern space capsule just built within the last few years. And so if you've ever seen documentaries on the old Apollo space mission program, if you've ever seen photographs, that was in the 1970s, wasn't it? So the control panel for the Apollo capsule was a bunch of physical switches, wasn't it? They were metal toggles. They were physical knobs and sliders to do. This is the control panel for the Dragon space capsule. It's all touchscreen, and it uses Chromium, the open source web engine that powers Google Chrome, that powers Microsoft Edge, that powers Opera, yes? The Chromium open source web engine also drives the touchscreens in the Dragon space capsule. And what's especially interesting is the software developers went onto Reddit and they had an Ask Me Anything session. I encourage you to look it up. It's fascinating. So when someone says, what's your tech stack? Is it mostly open source or in-house frameworks? The answer is we use C and C++ for flight control. We use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for the displays, and Python for the testing. Isn't that something? That's the software stack that's flying astronauts up to the International Space Station right now. But I really want to zoom in. The next question was, what is your front-end tech stack? And they say we use HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. They use web components heavily, but this is browser-native web development, isn't it? And you might think to yourself, well, I'm not writing many spaceship controls at my day job, right? Netflix dropped React from their homepage, from their landing page. And by getting rid of React and moving to plain JavaScript, we saw a 50% improvement in our time to interactive. Let me say this again. On their homepage, on their landing page, where performance is paramount, they dropped React and used browser native web technologies and got a 50% boost in performance. But you might say, all right, well, I don't work for Netflix either. Do Do any of you use GitHub? Show of hands? Oh, well, that's amazing, isn't it, huh? Who would have thought? GitHub removed jQuery from github.com. They say that we have recently completed a milestone where we were able to drop jQuery as a dependency of the front-end code on github.com. And they go on to say, instead of replacing it with another library or framework, we were able to achieve everything that we needed using the standard browser API. That's browser native software development. So it's amazing. I told you that I might challenge some of your assumptions. I hope I haven't hurt your feelings. Have I? Not yet? Okay, not yet, huh? Are you familiar with the Web Almanac? This is a project by the HTTP Archive. They survey 8.5 million websites every year, and they publish their findings. I was the co-author for 2 years running on the accessibility chapter. And so when you look at accessibility data through Lighthouse reports across 8.5 million web pages, you begin getting a good idea of what the state of the union is, isn't it? So in the JavaScript chapter, they list all of the most popular JavaScript libraries in use across 8.5 million websites. Number 1 is jQuery with an 80% market share. This is the latest version of the HTTP Archive, by the way. I'm not talking to you from 1996. Yeah? The number 1 JavaScript library on the web today is jQuery with an 81% market share. The next library in use is Core.js with a 41% market share. The next library is jQuery Migrate with a 34% market share. I have to keep reading down. These are the top 15 JavaScript libraries in use on the web today. And the only JavaScript web framework in there comes in at number 9. It's React. And React has an 8% market share. I want to say that again. Across all websites on the internet, React has an 8% market share. Does that surprise you? It's one of my favorite things to do, to come to a software conference like this and ask people, what do you think React's market share is? Oh, I don't know, 80%? 90%? Are there even other frameworks besides React? You might be thinking, well, wait a second. Where are all the other frameworks? Where's Angular? Where's Vue? Where's Svelte? They didn't make the top 15 list. As we'll see in just a moment, those JavaScript libraries have very low single-digit market shares and oftentimes less than 1% of the market. So if you're doing front-end development right now, overall, these JavaScript frameworks that seem to dominate these kinds of software conferences, overall make up about 10% of the web. 10%. The rest of these are libraries that help you with browser native web development. Let's take a look at jQuery. jQuery seems like it's been around forever, hasn't it? It's been around for 17 years? Wow. jQuery is a JavaScript library to simplify HTML DOM tree, getting elements, making changes to elements. You know that, right? That's what you used JavaScript in the past to do. That selector engine is called Sizzle. Their HTML DOM selector engine is called Sizzle. And if you read to the very last visible line on this screen, they say that Sizzle later stimulated the creation of the standard selectors API. This is browser native web code. This is why GitHub said, we have deprecated jQuery and we are no longer using it, and we don't plan on replacing it with another library, because everything that jQuery used to do is now a part of the standard JavaScript API that's baked into every modern browser. Interesting. Interesting. So this is the #1 website. Notice they aren't using Web Almanac. They've got a different report. It's W3 Tech. I'll pull that up in just a moment. But they say that as of August 2022, jQuery is used by 77% of the top 10 million web pages. Remember, the Web Almanac was 8.3 million. This other report is 10 million. But the difference between an 80% market share and a 77% market share feels like a statistical rounding error, doesn't it? So if jQuery is the #1 website across almost 8 million websites out of the top 10 million, and jQuery allows you to do browser-native web development, the #2 library is Core.js. Do any of you use Core.js? Have any of you played around with it at all? It's amazing. It's downloaded almost 35 million times a week. And what does Core.js do? It polyfills all of the standard JavaScript APIs that exist in modern browsers, but maybe don't exist in older browsers. So people download Core.js 35 million times a week to bring the new core JavaScript APIs back to older legacy browsers who don't have that. Core.js is not a framework. Core.js enables browser-native web development. The third library is jQuery Migrate, and it's kind of ironic. Do any of you use jQuery Migrate? Much like Core.js, jQuery Migrate, as jQuery releases new versions and new versions and new versions, and the things that they used to do are included in the standard JavaScript API now, jQuery gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so if you are upgrading jQuery but losing some of those features, jQuery Migrate polyfills the old jQuery features into the new jQuery release. You can see they say that way you can spot and fix what have otherwise become an error until you no longer need jQuery Migrate and can remove it. So the #3 JavaScript library on the web is to help you manage older versions of jQuery, and it's entirely meant to ultimately be removed from your code base. Because if you're doing everything right, you're keeping jQuery up to speed, you're using the core browser APIs, there is no need for jQuery Migrate, and ultimately there will be no need for jQuery in your website. These are the top 3 most downloaded JavaScript libraries on the web today. This is the report that we saw on that Wikipedia page when they were talking about 10 million users. So here's jQuery once again. There's that 77% of all 10 million users. React comes down farther on the list, but this gray bar shows that according to this report across 10 million websites, React only has a 4% market share. But the reason I like this report is where the Web Almanac doesn't show us where all the rest of the web libraries come in. This report does. Notice React is all the way up the top. There's our 4% market share. We start reading down, reading down, reading down. There's Vue that has a 0.8% market share. Down a little further, there's Angular that has a 0.3% market share. So remember when I said all JavaScript frameworks collectively make up under 10% of the libraries in use on the web today? This is what we're talking about. Are you feeling attacked? Are you feeling challenged by me? Am I hurting your feelings? That's not my point. I'm not saying, and therefore if you're a React developer, you're a bad person and you should be ashamed of yourself. That's the last thing I'm doing. What's nice about facts is that's what they are. These are facts. I'm trying to leave it up to you to come to your own conclusions. I certainly have come to some conclusions. I know as a professional, dedicating myself to a web framework that has 0.3% market share is probably not a use of my intellectual capital. Yeah? So, let's switch gears now and see some examples of browser native code. Now, again, some people get very frustrated with this because the examples I'm showing you are so simple. They're like, we like complexity. I can't imagine you're not bringing up a 10,000 line example. Have you done a hello world in React recently? Do you know how many lines of JavaScript it takes to do a hello world in modern React? 3.7 million lines of JavaScript. 3.7 million lines of JavaScript to do a React hello world. I don't know that we can afford that these days. Or should we want to? So, I bake bread. It started over COVID, but I've been making sourdough now and baguettes. But this is a recipe that's very near and dear to my heart because this is what got me started with bread making this famous no-knead bread. You literally mix the ingredients together, you leave them out on your counter overnight, unrefrigerated, and then you put it in a pan and bake it the next morning. It's a wonderful recipe and it's a wonderfully easy recipe as well. So here is this recipe in plain text. I wrote it out. We can see the file is named bread.txt, and I loaded it up in a web browser. And I say, well, that looks all right, doesn't it? But I don't know, maybe we need some font changes, maybe we need some color, maybe we need some other core HTML elements. So step one for me was to rename bread.text to bread.html. Now, is that an improvement or a giant step back? You tell me. In this, we had some structure to it, didn't we? We had some meetings. We've got lists of ingredients and lists of instructions, all that. All I did was take this exact file and renamed it .html, and I got this. We do get to learn something from this. We do get to learn something. What do we learn? That all of those carriage returns that I added in there, all of those multiple spaces I might add, HTML compresses all of that to just a single space. This is called inline formatting. And the reason I bring this up, I know it's a simple example, but this should be your mental model. This is exactly how your web browser sees that HTML when you download it. Now, one of the problems is, of course, it doesn't have any HTML in it. There are no elements. So let's go ahead and add one. I don't know HTML real well, and so let me just go ahead and wrap no-knead bread in a block element. Are you thinking to yourself, I've never used the block element, Scott? It's because it's completely made up. But if you go to this effort, if you wrap no-knead bread in a block and render it in your browser, look what you get. Isn't this one? Oh, you get no change. Did you think HTML was for look and feel? Or did you think HTML was for semantics, for meaning? CSS! It's in the name, isn't it? Cascading style sheets are how we change the look and feel of a browser. So if I go in once again and I add a style block in there, and this is called a selector. It's like whatever arbitrary element you name, if I named it foo, I could select on foo up in that style element. Since I created something named block, I'm using a CSS selector to select all block elements, and I'm saying I would like you to use display equals block instead of display equals inline, which is the default, which is what we learned already, right? So all of a sudden now I'm like, okay, now I'm on to something. I can have my block element, and it is now display block, and so we can see no need bread is on a line all by itself. Is this leaving you more satisfied or less satisfied? You're probably thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, well, don't I have to make the font bigger than the rest of my text? Don't I have to make that font bold? Don't I have to go through and recreate a bunch of stuff? Well, yeah, of course I do. Because I'm treating the browser like a tabula rasa. Are you familiar with tabula rasa? A blank slate. The first program that all modern developers learn is Hello World, isn't it? Look at me, I'm creating an entire world in Java. Fear me. Yes? That's one way you could do that. Consider the browser a tabula rasa. Consider the browser something that has no native functionality in it whatsoever, and it's your job as a developer to create that functionality. And how do we do that? We import JavaScript frameworks, typically, to create our own elements, right? Does this seem familiar to people who use web frameworks? Yeah. So the choice you have now is you could absolutely make up all of your elements. Knock yourself out. Is that the easy road or the hard road? That's the very hard road. That's the road of ignorance and arrogance, which is a dangerous combination, isn't it? New developers expecting the browser to be a tabula rasa say, we must do our own hello world and we must bring all functionality because clearly the browser does nothing. Or we can study up on HTML. There's a whole list of elements that you can use, and these elements not only have custom look and feel associated with them, they have custom behavior as well. But if we read the intro paragraph to this spec, it says HTML is the World Wide Web's core language, and it was originally designed as a language for semantically describing documents. There's that word again, right? Semantic. HTML is for semantics. CSS is for style. So what is semantics? Meaning. Isn't that lovely? Think about that for a moment. Your job as a web developer is to bring meaning into the world. You saw that recipe.txt. It didn't render, so it's your job as a developer to bring meaning to that document, to bring semantics to that document so the browser can understand. This is what it ends up looking like. There's not a block element anymore. There's an H1 element, isn't there? And then we have ingredients, and down below we have instructions, right? Look, ingredients is an H2. Oh, how many H's are there? 6. So we can create this deeply nested document, but you should be thinking of this way. There should be one and only one H1, and it should be at the top of your document because it's the most important header. This describes your document. Everything needs to come below the H1, and you can have H2s like ingredients and instructions. You can have H3s, and so on and so on and so forth. So new developers that are new to this, when they write code like this and look at the results, they're like, oh, that looks much better now, doesn't it? Whew. HTML is great for making my website look better. In fact, when we say this is an unordered list with list items, of course it has look and feel, but more importantly, it has semantics. It says, yeah, this is how that ingredients list is going to look, but then we are treating this now as a list which has elements, which means we can iterate through it, which means we can do all kinds of interesting things with lists. This is so much more powerful because we are bringing in semantics and leveraging the browser's inbuilt styling for these elements. Now, These headers, you might be saying, okay, Scott, why are you so upset about this? Why should we worry about getting our headers in order? I'm going to give you several examples. One that might interest you the most is search engine optimization. If Google spiders your website and you have elements like block and div class equals subtitle and so on and so forth, does Google's web spider know anything about that? Not at all. Not at all. But if you structure your document in a way where these headers are very prominent, that's how people use the web. They skim and they look for big text and then they look for smaller text and look for smaller text. And finally, when you figure out where you're at, then you can begin reading. If I already have all my ingredients assembled, I might want to visit that web page and scan real quickly and get down to instructions because I've already done the other bits. Yeah? But these header tags not only break up your text, it helps your websites rank better. Having a well-structured article improves your readability score. There are so many benefits that come from simply using HTML as it was designed and as it was intended to be used. But wait, there's more. You didn't think I wasn't going to talk about accessibility, did you? I've been talking about accessibility in every one of my talks. It's that important. As a matter of fact, the keynote tomorrow is digital modernization through accessibility. I hope to see you there after you vote. Yes? So VoiceOver is Apple's screen reader for blind and low vision users. If you are on Android, it's a similar product called Navigator. So Android uses Navigator, Apple uses VoiceOver. They have similar functionality, just different keystrokes. But here is this no-knead bread with my H1 and my H2s. And if I were a blind or low vision user, I couldn't just quickly scan and see no-knead bread is the biggest text, so it must be important. Ingredients and instructions are the next bigger text, so they must be important. That's how we scan for importance, right? But if you are blind or low vision, how do you have that same experience if you can't see the font or the boldness or the size? Let me play a quick video for you.
Recipe, no need bread, window, recipe, no need bread, web content, has keyboard focus. You are currently on web content. To enter the web area, press Control, Option, Shift, down arrow. Navigation, character, words, character, nav, headings. Heading level 1, no need bread. You are heading level 2, ingredients. Heading level 2, instructions. You are currently on a heading level 2, inside of web content. To exit this web area, press Control, Option, Shift, up arrow.
So what happened there is if you turn on VoiceOver, you get this magic rotor is what it's called. But if you're holding a phone, you literally turn on VoiceOver and then just turn your fingers as if you were turning a knob on the screen. But imagine if you're blind, that doesn't have to be anywhere in particular on the screen. As long as your fingers can hit the glass and begin twisting, we can see these rotors come up. So if I can't see this website, but I can visit this website and I can use this web rotor, I can navigate this website just as easily as a sighted user.
Window, recipe, no need bread, web content, has keyboard focus. You are currently on web content. To enter the web area, press Control, Option, Shift, down arrow. Navigation, character, words, character, nav, headings. Heading level 1, no need bread.
Swipe down.
Heading level 2, ingredients.
Swipe down.
Heading level 2, instructions. You are currently on heading level 2.
Turn, 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 turn. Swipe down, swipe down, swipe down. Now that's what happens if you use header tags as they were designed, as they were intended to be used. What if instead you made a different decision? You liked that block element so much you decided to keep it? Oh, and look at ingredients. There we go, a good old div, huh? When all else fails, throw a div at it? Is this a good idea? This, in fact, is a terrible idea. Because you can still style your divs and your blocks to look as if they are a header. But is HTML about look and feel, or is it about semantics? Semantics. And what are the semantics of div? What would a blind or low vision user experience if they visited this website that lives firmly in div land?
Window, recipe, no need bread, web content, has keyboard focus. Characters, you are words. Navigate, window spot, navigate, character, words.
Wait a second. Didn't you remember when we had that header section before and it was really easy for me to swipe down and scan? How come that headers section disappeared? Because there are no headers. Because there are no headers. You made a div look like an H2, but that didn't make it an H2, did it? That didn't make it an H2 in the least. So divs are an HTML element for simply generic content flow. It has no effect on the content or the layout until it's styled with CSS. It is the semanticless element of HTML. Yeah? Except for span. Span's a semanticless element for HTML as well. As a matter of fact, as we read, it's a generic inline container. Oh, remember the default is inline, display inline, and the other is display block. So what is div? Is it inline or block? Block. What is span? Is it block or inline? Inline. If you read the middle there, they said span should be used only when no other semantic element is available. Is that how you do web development? Is a div your element of last resort? Or is it an element of first resort? How do you feel about semantics, huh? We've mentioned the Web Almanac, 8.5 million websites. Do you know what the number one most popular element is across 8.5 million web pages? Div. A third of all elements on web pages are divs. It seems as though some of the web developers out there missed the memo, didn't they? They're focusing on semanticless development instead of using the right element for the job. How about images? What would images have to do? I mean, like images, this is the easiest thing in the world, right? On my no-knead bread recipe, I want to bring in an image of some no-knead bread. There it is. Oh, that looks just beautiful, doesn't it? I'm getting hungry already. Yeah? There is a bug. Do you see the bug in this image tag? It's missing the alt text, isn't it? It's missing the alt text. And so while this looks good, developers who use divs tend to put something in place, hit refresh, and say, looks good, let's ship it. Is looks good as rigorous as a compiler or a linter? Probably not. Probably not. So yes, it worked. But is it valid? Is it well-formed? Let's use a tool called Google Lighthouse to test this. How many of you use Google Lighthouse in your job right now? One hand? One hand? Two? Oh, some people are doing this, so you only use it halfway on your job? Is that what it is? Yeah? Almost none of you are using Lighthouse right now. That's good. That means you're in the right place. Google Lighthouse is an open source automated tool for measuring the quality of web pages. It will give you performance evaluations. It'll give you accessibility evaluations. It'll give you SEO evaluations, search engine optimization, right? And what's amazing, how many of you have Google Chrome installed on your laptop? Oh, now a lot of hands go up, yes. Every copy of Google Chrome on the planet has Lighthouse inside of it. If you just raised your hands, you have this tool right now. And I hope after this evening you will start using it furiously and repeatedly. Yes? So how does this work? Well, if you have Google Chrome for the desktop, you visit any web page, any URL. I got questions yesterday on my talk called Continuous Accessibility, where we talked about this. Any URL here works. If it's a public URL, we can use Lighthouse to analyze it. If it's a private URL behind the firewall, you can use Lighthouse to analyze it. You can use Lighthouse to analyze your test environment, your staging environment, your integration environment. You can even use Lighthouse to test local host. You can use it to test any URL. The secret is to visit a URL, pull up your dev tools, and click on Analyze Page Load. It'll give you a lovely report card. I'm amazed that we aren't using this, because as web developers, it almost feels like cheating. Imagine that you write any web page and you want to ask an expert to evaluate how well-formed your web page is. That's what Google Lighthouse is. So why don't we do that? Here is our no-need bread recipe with that image that doesn't have alt text on it. So notice that you can test this as a mobile or a desktop browser. Mobile is by default because 2/3 of all web traffic today comes from a smartphone. 2/3 of all web traffic comes from a smartphone. That number is expected to increase to 75% in the next year or two. What do you think that percentage is in India? 85? 95, 99.9% of traffic comes from people's smartphones. So this is why you should test in a mobile, if nothing else. It's what Google uses for your SEO and page rank. Let me be very clear about this. Google uses your mobile experience for SEO and page rank, not your desktop user experience. So you absolutely, if you're going to test on one, should be testing on mobile, not desktop. So, when I generate a report on this website, you can see I get some scores across the top. A 90 on performance, that's great, that's an A. And 85% on accessibility. That's weird because I look at it and like the image is right there. So ship it, right? We're done, we're good here? No. If we scroll down to the accessibility section, we can see the failing element. It says this element is failing because it doesn't have an alt attribute. So, in order to catch yourself, all you have to do is run Lighthouse before you commit. Or, if you have Lighthouse set up in your CI/CD pipeline, you could simply commit and then have Lighthouse do this kind of accessibility testing in your integration environment. It's that simple. It's absolutely that simple. Now, the HTML2 spec came out in 1995. HTML2 is the specification that introduced the image element. So 1995, what is that, almost 30 years ago at this point, we've had an image element in the web. Notice the attributes we have in there. Alt, text used in place of the referenced image resource. You have never been able to use an image tag in HTML without having accessibility. Let me go further on that. Every HTML element that you use, every browser native HTML element is accessible out of the box. If you use browser native technology and you use these elements as they were designed and as they were intended to be used, you have an accessible website. If you use divs instead of H1s, if you have images without alt text, that's not using HTML as it was designed and as it was intended to be used. So our good friends, the Web Almanac. I told you, 8.5 million websites, we go looking around, finding interesting statistics. Just over half of all web pages that have an image in them use alt text. Only 59% of the images on the web have an alt text associated with them. We've had 30 years to get this right. How long is it going to take? How long is it going to take? Because this alt text is not just for your blind and low vision users. It's also for SEO, isn't it? It's also for search engine optimization. I worked for a client that was rolling out a new catalog, 20,000 new items. They sell tractors in the United States. And so they're selling things like baseball hats with a green tractor on it. And I said, you want to sell those baseball hats, don't you? Oh, yeah. We have sales goals associated with it and everything. How is someone going to find that baseball hat with a green tractor on it? They're probably going to go to a search engine and type in baseball hat, green tractor. Does that sound like alt text to you? I told them we need to take a yes and approach to accessibility. We need to have alt text and all 20,000 new items in there because it will help our blind and low vision users. Yes. And it will also help all the rest of our users as well. It will boost our SEO. I said, I want to take this initiative and I want to tie it to our sales KPIs. I want to tie it to our SEO KPIs. Yes. And I want to do it to solve the accessibility problems we have as well. Does that make sense? Yeah. There's another report out there called the WebAIM Million. Remember the Almanac has 8.5 million websites. WebAIM just surveys 1 million websites just. Yeah? But what does the WebAIM Million report have to say about missing alt text? Again, not 59%, 54.5% of all web pages are lacking alt text. Over half of images on the web are lacking alt text. And notice this is longitudinal. So in 2023, it was 58%. In 2022, it was 55, 60, 66, 68. So you might say, well, in 2019, 2/3 of all images lacked alt text. At least now, only more than half of them support alt text. I guess that's a glass half full kind of attitude, isn't it? We shouldn't ignore the progress we make, but it is unconscionable that in 2024, after 30 years of having an image tag, over half of the web developers out there don't seem to understand the fundamentals of using an image tag on the web. None of us in here, though, right? It must be someone else out there. They said that there's an average of 55.6 images on every homepage. An average of 55 images. And the data shows that 14.6% of those images had questionable or repetitive alt text. Alt text like image. Is that helpful? Not at all. Alt text like img0001.jpg. Is that helpful? Not at all. Not at all. So we should expect at least 1/3 of all images, even if they have alt text, to have ineffective or bad alt text. So Here's my image now. Notice that I've got a source in there, no need bread.jpg, and I have an alt text, fresh loaf of no need bread, an enamel cast iron oven. Notice though that I messed up the source. I got a whole bunch of X's in front of that file name. That image isn't going to load. So are we going to get the little broken window pane that we get when we have images that don't load? Do you know when you see the little broken window pane? When you don't have alt text. Because if you do have alt text, that's what appears in its place. It is literally alternative text. If the image cannot be displayed for whatever reason, then this text, a fresh loaf of no need bread and enamel cast iron skillet. A fresh loaf of no need bread and enamel cast iron Dutch oven. Can we see how this would help SEO as well? Even if the image was broken, even if that catalog had a busted image, but the text still showed up, baseball hat with a green tractor. You might not buy it if you can't see the image of the hat, but this is degrading gracefully. Getting the broken window pane is a syntax error. Plain and simple. So, we're back to where we started. The only difference is now I have alt text. A developer who looks at this would not see any difference at all between the previous one, but now we've used Lighthouse. Now we've figured out SEO is important here. Now we've figured out a number of things. So even though it doesn't look any different, it has crucial semantics added. Because HTML is about adding semantics to your web page. So what have we learned? What have we learned? I hope you will visit the Web Almanac. They've been publishing this since 2019. I told you I co-authored the accessibility chapter for 2 years running. It's a fascinating document. If you want to learn more about how JavaScript is being used, or JavaScript frameworks, or CSS, or videos, or images, or anything like that. The Web Almanac will give you that information across 8.5 million web pages. And this is where we learned that React is the only JavaScript-based web framework in the top 15, and it comes in with about an 8% market share. That is, unless we visit W3 Tech. Again, W3 Tech is a survey of 10 million top websites, and we find that React only has a 4% market share there, and again, all of these other frameworks. What else did we learn? We learned that astronauts are flying to the International Space Station using browser-native tech. We learned that if you watch Netflix, you should experience a 50% performance boost because they're using browser-native tech. The next time you're in github.com, revel at how fast it is, because this is a website that has dropped jQuery for browser-native web technology. And that, my friends, is browser-native web development. Did you enjoy yourself? Thank you so much for your time and attention. I appreciate it.